Question 1. An organization is conducting an internal assessment of its environmental management system in accordance with ISO 14018-2021. The assessment team identifies a gap in how operational staff understand their role in managing hazardous waste, specifically concerning the segregation and temporary storage requirements mandated by the National Environmental Protection Act. Which of the following training and communication strategies would most effectively address this identified deficiency, ensuring compliance and improved environmental performance assessment? Option A. Distributing a general environmental awareness brochure to all employees that broadly covers waste management principles without specific procedural details relevant to hazardous waste. Option B. Conducting a single, one-hour workshop for all employees on environmental management, focusing on the company's overall environmental policy and the importance of compliance with national legislation, without specific operational guidance. Option C. Relying on existing, outdated standard operating procedures for hazardous waste handling, assuming staff will refer to them as needed for clarification during their daily tasks. Option D. Implementing a targeted training program for operational staff that details the specific segregation and storage procedures for hazardous waste, linking these actions directly to their contribution to the organization's environmental objectives and legal compliance, followed by a confirmation of understanding through a brief quiz. The correct answer is D. Implementing a targeted training program for operational staff that details the specific segregation and storage procedures for hazardous waste, linking these actions directly to their contribution to the organization's environmental objectives and legal compliance, followed by a confirmation of understanding through a brief quiz. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 provides guidelines for assessing environmental performance. Effective communication and training are crucial for the successful implementation and operation of any environmental management system, including those undergoing performance assessment. Clause 7.2 of ISO 14018 emphasizes the need for personnel to be aware of the environmental policy, significant environmental aspects, their individual contributions to the effectiveness of the environmental management system, and the implications of departing from specified procedures. Training should be tailored to the specific roles and responsibilities within the organization, ensuring that all relevant personnel understand their part in achieving environmental objectives. This includes awareness of applicable legal and other requirements, such as national regulations on waste management or emissions, which are critical for compliance and performance improvement. The organization must determine the necessary competence for personnel affecting environmental performance, provide training, or take other actions to achieve this competence, and evaluate the effectiveness of the training. This proactive approach ensures that individuals possess the knowledge and skills to contribute positively to the organization's environmental performance assessment and overall environmental management. Question 2. An organization has successfully implemented an environmental management system certified to ISO 14001-2015 to rigorously evaluate the effectiveness of its environmental programs and demonstrate progress towards its sustainability objectives. Which of the following approaches, informed by ISO 14018-2021, would be most appropriate for assessing its overall environmental performance? Option A. Prioritizing the reduction of operational costs through efficiency improvements, assuming this directly correlates with improved environmental performance without specific measurement. Option B. Focusing solely on ensuring compliance with all applicable environmental regulations and internal operational procedures established by the ISO 14001 system. Option C. Developing a detailed internal audit checklist based on the clauses of ISO 14001-2015 to verify the proper functioning of the EMS components. Option D. Conducting a comprehensive lifecycle assessment of key products and services, analyzing environmental performance indicators derived from the EMS, and benchmarking these against industry, best practices, and legal requirements. The correct answer is D. Conducting a comprehensive life cycle assessment of key products and services, analyzing environmental performance indicators derived from the EMS, and benchmarking these against industry, best practices, and legal requirements. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 provides guidelines for assessing the environmental performance of organizations, acting as a complementary standard to ISO 14001, which establishes the framework for an environmental management system, EMS. While ISO 14001 focuses on the asterisk system asterisk for managing environmental aspects and impacts, ISO 14018 offers a structured approach to asterisk evaluating asterisk the effectiveness and outcomes of that system and the organization's overall environmental performance. It emphasizes a life cycle perspective and the integration of environmental considerations into strategic decision-making. The key distinction is that ISO 14001 is about asterisk establishing and maintaining asterisk and EMS, whereas ISO 14018 is about asterisk measuring and reporting asterisk the results of environmental efforts. Therefore, a robust environmental performance assessment, as guided by ISO 14018, would involve analyzing data and trends that demonstrate the impact of the EMS implemented under ISO 14001, thereby verifying its contribution to achieving environmental objectives and identifying areas for improvement. This assessment goes beyond mere compliance with legal requirements, which is a component of ISO 14001, to a broader evaluation of how well the organization is managing its environmental footprint and achieving its stated environmental goals. The guidelines in ISO 14018 help an organization understand the how well of its environmental management, complementing the how-to provided by ISO 14001. Question 3. An industrial conglomerate, Veridian Dynamics, is undergoing an environmental performance assessment according to ISO 14018-2021. They have implemented a new product line designed with modular components intended for easy disassembly and refurbishment, aiming to extend product lifespan and reduce end-of-life waste. Considering the principles of a circular economy and the guidelines for environmental performance assessment, which of the following best reflects Veridian Dynamics' focus in demonstrating their commitment to circularity within the assessment framework? Option A, highlighting the achievement of strict adherence to national air quality standards and the efficient treatment of wastewater generated during manufacturing processes. Option B, emphasizing metrics related to the percentage of recycled materials incorporated into new products, the rate of successful component refurbishment and reintegration, and a reduction in virgin resource input per unit of output. Option C, quantifying the total energy consumed by their production facilities and the carbon dioxide emissions per kilowatt-hour of electricity used. Option D, detailing the company's corporate social responsibility initiatives, including community engagement programs and employee volunteer hours dedicated to environmental cleanups. The correct answer is B, emphasizing metrics related to the percentage of recycled materials incorporated into new products, the rate of successful component refurbishment and reintegration, and a reduction in virgin resource input per unit of output. Explanation: the core principle of circular economy, as it relates to environmental performance assessment under ISO 14018-2021, is to move away from linear take-make-dispose models towards systems that regenerate and restore. This involves designing products for durability, repairability, and recyclability, keeping materials in use for as long as possible, and minimizing waste generation. When assessing environmental performance, an organization adopting circular economy principles would focus on metrics that reflect the longevity of product life cycles, the extent of material reuse and recycling, and the reduction in virgin resource consumption. For instance, tracking the percentage of recycled content in new products, the number of products repaired and returned to use, and the reduction in landfill waste are key indicators. The concept of eco-design is fundamental, integrating environmental considerations from the very beginning of product development to facilitate these circular strategies. Regulations like the EU's Ecodesign Directive and various waste framework directives provide a legal context that encourages such practices. Therefore, an organization's commitment to circularity will be demonstrated by its proactive efforts to extend product life, facilitate material recovery, and minimize the environmental footprint across the entire value chain, rather than solely focusing on end-of-pipe treatment or compliance with basic emission standards. The aim is to decouple economic activity from the consumption of finite resources. Question 4. When an organization undertakes an environmental performance assessment as guided by ISO 14018-2021 and seeks to incorporate diverse external perspectives to ensure a comprehensive and credible evaluation, which of the following approaches best aligns with the standard's principles for stakeholder engagement in this context? Option A. Systematically identifying key stakeholder groups, understanding their interests and concerns related to the organization's environmental activities, and establishing structured mechanisms for feedback and dialogue to inform the assessment methodology and findings. Option B. Focusing engagement efforts exclusively on regulatory bodies and legal compliance departments to ensure adherence to existing environmental legislation like the Clean Air Act. Option C. Primarily relying on publicly available environmental reports and media coverage to gauge stakeholder sentiment and potential impacts without direct interaction. Option D. Conducting a single, broad public survey to solicit general opinions on environmental issues, without specific tailoring to the organization's operational context or targeted stakeholder groups. The correct answer is A. Systematically identifying key stakeholder groups, understanding their interests and concerns related to the organization's environmental activities, and establishing structured mechanisms for feedback and dialogue to inform the assessment methodology and findings. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 emphasizes that the assessment of an organization's environmental performance should consider the perspectives of various stakeholders. Stakeholder engagement is crucial for gathering comprehensive data, understanding the broader impacts of environmental performance, and ensuring the relevance and credibility of the assessment. When an organization is assessing its environmental performance, it must identify and engage with relevant stakeholders. This engagement process should be structured to elicit meaningful input, which can then be integrated into the assessment framework. For instance, local communities might provide insights into the impact of emissions on public health, while suppliers could offer data on the environmental footprint of raw materials. Regulatory bodies might contribute information on compliance with environmental laws, such as the European Union's Emissions Trading System, EU ETS, or National Waste Management Regulations. Non-governmental organizations, NGO, can offer critical perspectives on biodiversity impacts or resource depletion. The goal is to move beyond internal data and gain a holistic view of the organization's environmental interactions and performance, thereby enhancing the thoroughness and acceptability of the assessment. The effectiveness of the assessment is directly linked to the quality and breadth of stakeholder input received, and how well this input is incorporated into the evaluation process. Question 5. A chemical manufacturing firm, ChemSynth Solutions, uses a proprietary solvent, Solv-X, in its primary production line. According to ISO 14018-2021 guidelines for assessing environmental performance, which of the following represents the most comprehensive consideration of Solv-X's environmental aspects throughout its life cycle? Option A. Investigating the potential for accidental spills of Solv-X during transportation to the plant and the immediate cleanup procedures implemented for such events. Option B. Primarily assessing the energy consumption associated with Solv-X's distillation and recovery processes within the facility and the regulatory compliance of its waste disposal. Option C. Evaluating the environmental impacts of Solv-X's production, transportation, in-plant usage, waste management, and the potential environmental implications during the product's use and end-of-life phases. Option D. Focusing solely on the solvent's volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions during its application within the manufacturing plant and the disposal of used solvent. Correct answer is D. Focusing solely on the solvent's volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions during its application within the manufacturing plant and the disposal of used solvent. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 provides guidelines for assessing the environmental performance of organizations. A critical aspect of this assessment involves identifying and evaluating environmental aspects, which are elements of an organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. When considering the life cycle of a product, the standard emphasizes a holistic approach, moving beyond direct operational controls to encompass upstream and downstream influences. For a chemical manufacturing company that utilizes a specific solvent in its production process, the assessment of environmental performance must extend beyond the immediate use of the solvent within the plant. This includes evaluating the environmental impacts associated with the extraction and refining of raw materials used to produce the solvent, its transportation to the manufacturing facility, the energy consumed during its use, the emissions generated during the manufacturing process, and importantly, the management and disposal of waste streams containing the solvent or its byproducts. Furthermore, the potential for residual solvent in the final product and its subsequent impact during the product's use phase and end-of-life disposal must be considered. This comprehensive life cycle perspective is crucial for accurately identifying significant environmental aspects and developing effective environmental management strategies, aligning with the principles of ISO 14018-2021. The guidelines advocate for considering all phases of a product's life to ensure a thorough understanding of its environmental footprint. Question 6. When initiating the planning phase for an environmental performance evaluation in accordance with ISO 14018-2021, what foundational element must be established to ensure the subsequent assessment is targeted and effective? Option A. A clear definition of the evaluation's objectives, scope, and specific performance criteria. Option B. A comprehensive list of all potential environmental impacts, regardless of significance. Option C. The formation of an external advisory committee for validation purposes. Option D. The immediate procurement of advanced environmental monitoring software. Correct answer is A. A clear definition of the evaluation's objectives, scope, and specific performance criteria. Explanation. The fundamental principle of ISO 14018-2021 regarding the planning of environmental performance evaluation is to establish a systematic and integrated approach. This involves defining clear objectives for the evaluation, identifying the scope of what will be assessed, and determining the criteria against which performance will be measured. The standard emphasizes the need to select appropriate methods and tools that align with the defined objectives and scope. Crucially, the planning phase must consider the context of the organization, including its environmental aspects, legal obligations, and stakeholder expectations. The selection of indicators is a key component, requiring them to be relevant, reliable, and comparable over time. When establishing the plan, it is essential to allocate necessary resources, assign responsibilities, and set a timeline for the evaluation process. The process should also incorporate mechanisms for reviewing and updating the plan as the organization's circumstances or environmental priorities evolve. This structured planning ensures that the environmental performance evaluation is meaningful, actionable, and contributes to the organization's overall environmental management system and improvement efforts. Question 7. An organization operating under ISO 14018-2021 is developing its environmental performance communication strategy. They have identified several key stakeholder groups, including local community representatives concerned with air quality, potential investors focused on long-term sustainability, and regulatory agencies requiring adherence to emission standards. Which communication approach best aligns with the guidelines of ISO 14018-2021 for effectively conveying environmental performance to these distinct groups? Option A. Prioritize the dissemination of high-level sustainability achievements through social media campaigns, assuming broad stakeholder interest in positive environmental messaging. Option B. Develop a single, comprehensive environmental report that includes detailed technical data, financial projections related to sustainability, and a summary of community engagement activities, distributed via the company website. Option C. Focus exclusively on statutory reporting requirements, providing only the legally mandated data to all stakeholders to ensure compliance and avoid misinterpretation. Option D. Create separate, tailored communication materials for each stakeholder group, utilizing technical reports for regulators, investor briefs highlighting ESG metrics and risk mitigation, and community newsletters detailing local impact reduction efforts. The correct answer is B. Develop a single, comprehensive environmental report that includes detailed technical data, financial projections related to sustainability, and a summary of community engagement activities, distributed via the company website. Explanation. ISO 14018, 2021, specifically in its guidance on communicating environmental performance, emphasizes the importance of tailoring information to different stakeholder groups. The standard promotes transparency and accountability by suggesting that organizations should clearly articulate their environmental objectives, targets, and progress. When considering communication strategies, the effectiveness hinges on understanding the audience's needs and expectations. For instance, regulatory bodies may require detailed compliance data and specific metrics, while investors might be more interested in how environmental performance impacts financial risk and opportunity, and the general public might seek information on local environmental impacts and corporate social responsibility initiatives. The standard advocates for a structured approach to communication, ensuring that the information conveyed is accurate, verifiable, and relevant to the intended recipients. This involves selecting appropriate communication channels and formats that facilitate comprehension and engagement. The objective is to foster trust and enable informed decision-making by all parties involved in the organization's environmental performance assessment. Therefore, a comprehensive communication plan under ISO 14018, 2021 must consider the diverse information requirements and preferred communication methods of each stakeholder group to achieve meaningful engagement and support for the organization's environmental management system. Question 8. When initiating an environmental performance assessment according to ISO 14018-2021, what is the foundational step that dictates the subsequent data collection, analysis, and interpretation, ensuring the assessment's relevance and effectiveness? Option A. Defining the scope and context of the assessment. Option B. Establishing specific environmental performance indicators. Option C. Reviewing relevant national environmental legislation. Option D. Communicating findings to external stakeholders. The correct answer is A. Defining the scope and context of the assessment. Explanation. The process of assessing an organization's environmental performance, as outlined in ISO 14018-2021, involves several key stages. The initial step, crucial for establishing a baseline, is to define the scope and context of the assessment. This involves identifying the boundaries of the organization or its specific activities to be evaluated, understanding its environmental aspects and impacts, and considering its significant environmental issues in relation to its strategic direction and interested parties. Following this, the collection and analysis of relevant environmental performance data are undertaken. This data should be reliable, verifiable, and directly related to the identified environmental aspects. The standard emphasizes the importance of establishing clear criteria for evaluation, which may include legal requirements, organizational objectives, and benchmarks from comparable organizations. The interpretation of this data against the established criteria allows for the identification of strengths, weaknesses, and areas for improvement. Crucially, the guidelines stress the iterative nature of the assessment process, where findings are used to inform the development and implementation of environmental objectives and targets, thereby driving continuous improvement. The final stage typically involves reporting the results and communicating them to relevant stakeholders, ensuring transparency and facilitating informed decision-making for enhanced environmental management. Therefore, the foundational step that underpins the entire assessment is the comprehensive definition of the assessment's scope and context, which dictates the subsequent data collection, analysis, and interpretation. Question 9. A manufacturing firm, Eco-Innovate Solutions, is developing a suite of environmental performance indicators, EPI, to track its progress in reducing its ecological footprint, as per ISO 14018-2021 guidelines. They are considering an indicator for water consumption per unit of product. This indicator is calculated using readily available meter readings and production volumes. However, the firm also operates a large wastewater treatment facility that significantly impacts local water bodies, but this impact is not directly captured by the water consumption per unit of product metric. Which of the following characteristics would make this specific EPI most aligned with the principles of effective EPIs as outlined in ISO 14018-2021 for Eco-Innovate Solutions? Option A. The EPI is primarily qualitative, describing trends in water usage rather than providing a specific numerical value for assessment. Option B. The EPI is derived from complex scientific models that account for all downstream ecological effects of water usage, ensuring a holistic assessment of water-related impacts. Option C. The EPI is based on industry averages for water consumption, providing a benchmark for comparison, and is easy to communicate to the public. Option D. The EPI directly relates to a significant environmental aspect, water use, and is quantifiable with reliable data, but its effectiveness is limited by its failure to capture the impact of wastewater discharge on local water bodies, a critical aspect of their environmental footprint. The correct answer is D. The EPI directly relates to a significant environmental aspect, water use, and is quantifiable with reliable data, but its effectiveness is limited by its failure to capture the impact of wastewater discharge on local water bodies, a critical aspect of their environmental footprint. Explanation: the effectiveness of environmental performance indicators, EPI, is a cornerstone of ISO 14018-2021, which provides guidance on assessing an organization's environmental performance. The standard emphasizes that EPIs must be relevant, reliable, and understandable to be useful for decision-making and improvement. When evaluating EPIs, several characteristics are paramount. An EPI should be directly linked to the organization's significant environmental aspects and impacts, ensuring that it measures what truly matters from an environmental perspective. It must also be sensitive to changes in environmental performance, meaning that improvements or deteriorations in the organization's activities should be reflected in the indicator's value. Furthermore, the EPI needs to be quantifiable or capable of being assessed objectively, allowing for consistent measurement over time in comparison with benchmarks or targets. The availability of reliable data for calculation is also a critical factor, as an EPI that cannot be measured accurately or consistently is of limited value. Finally, the interpretation of the EPI should be clear and unambiguous, enabling stakeholders to understand the organization's environmental progress or challenges. Considering these points, an EPI that is directly tied to a significant environmental aspect, exhibits sensitivity to performance changes, is objectively measurable with reliable data, and offers clear interpretability, will be considered highly effective. Question 10. Consider a hypothetical scenario where a biotextile manufacturing firm, Veridian Weaves, is developing a new line of apparel made from algae-derived fibers. To comply with the principles outlined in ISO 14018-2021 for assessing environmental performance, what methodological approach would be most effective for Veridian Weaves to identify and evaluate the environmental aspects and impacts of their entire product lifecycle, from algae cultivation to the final disposal of the garments? Option A. Focus solely on the direct operational emissions and waste generation at the manufacturing facility, as these are the most easily quantifiable environmental aspects. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, that maps all inputs, outputs, and potential environmental changes from raw material sourcing and cultivation through the manufacturing processes, distribution, consumer use, and end-of-life management of the biotextile apparel. Option C. Rely on existing industry benchmarks and general environmental reports for the textile sector to infer the potential impacts of their specific algae-based product. Option D. Primarily analyze the energy consumption during the garment production phase, as this is typically the most significant environmental impact for textile products. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive life cycle assessment, LCA, that maps all inputs, outputs, and potential environmental changes from raw material sourcing and cultivation through the manufacturing processes, distribution, consumer use, and end-of-life management of the biotextile apparel. Explanation: the core of assessing environmental performance under ISO 14018-2021 involves systematically identifying an organization's environmental aspects and their associated environmental impacts. An environmental aspect is defined as an element of an organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. An environmental impact is any change to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial, wholly or partially resulting from an organization's environmental aspects. ISO 14018 emphasizes a life cycle perspective when identifying these aspects and impacts. This means considering all stages from raw material acquisition through design, production, use, end-of-life treatment, and final disposal. For example, the manufacturing of a product might have aspects such as energy consumption, water usage, and emissions to air. The environmental impacts associated with these aspects could be depletion of natural resources, water scarcity, and air pollution. Similarly, the transportation of the product could have aspects like fuel consumption and exhaust emissions, leading to impacts such as climate change and local air quality degradation. The standard guides organizations to establish criteria for determining which aspects are significant, often based on factors like the severity, scale, duration, and likelihood of the impact, as well as regulatory requirements and stakeholder concerns. Therefore, when evaluating a company's approach to environmental performance assessment, the most comprehensive method would involve a thorough examination of all inputs, outputs, and potential changes to the environment across its entire value chain, from cradle to grave, ensuring that no significant interactions are overlooked. This systematic, life cycle-based identification and evaluation process is fundamental to establishing an effective environmental management system. Question 11. An industrial facility operating under stringent national environmental regulations, which mandate prompt reporting of any accidental release of hazardous materials, is conducting an internal assessment of its emergency preparedness framework, as guided by ISO 14018-2021. The facility recently experienced a minor spill of a non-toxic solvent, which was contained and cleaned up within 2 hours by the on-site response team. However, the incident report was filed with the regulatory body 3 hours after the discovery of the spill due to an internal administrative delay in the approval process. According to the principles outlined in ISO 14018-2021, for assessing environmental performance in emergency situations, which aspect of the facility's preparedness and response system is most likely to be flagged as requiring significant improvement? Option A. The availability of specialized personal protective equipment for spill response personnel. Option B. The efficiency of the communication and reporting chain for regulatory compliance. Option C. The adequacy of the initial hazard identification and risk assessment for routine operations. Option D. The effectiveness of the immediate containment and cleanup procedures. The correct answer is D. The effectiveness of the immediate containment and cleanup procedures. Explanation. ISO 14018-2021, in its guidance on assessing environmental performance, emphasizes the critical role of an organization's preparedness and response mechanisms for environmental emergencies. The standard posits that effective emergency preparedness involves not only the identification of potential environmental incidents and their likely impacts, but also the establishment of clear procedures and responsibilities for managing such events. A core component of this is the development of a robust emergency response plan that outlines immediate actions, communication protocols, resource allocation, and post-incident recovery strategies. Crucially, the standard stresses the importance of regular testing and review of these plans through drills and simulations to ensure their efficacy and to identify areas for improvement. Furthermore, the integration of lessons learned from actual incidents or exercises into the revision of the plan is a key element for continuous enhancement of the organization's environmental resilience. The assessment of an organization's environmental performance, as per ISO 14018-2021, would therefore evaluate the comprehensiveness, practicality, and demonstrated effectiveness of its emergency preparedness and response framework, including its ability to adapt to evolving risks and regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by national environmental protection acts. The goal is to minimize the environmental impact of any incident and to ensure a swift and organized return to normal operations. Question 12. An advanced manufacturing firm, Ether Dynamics, is undertaking a comprehensive review of its resource efficiency in line with ISO 14018-2021 guidelines. They have identified that their current production process for a specialized alloy component exhibits a significant material yield loss during the machining phase. To address this, Ether Dynamics is considering adopting a new additive manufacturing, 3D printing, technique for this component, which promises substantially lower material waste. However, The energy consumption per unit produced by the additive manufacturing process is notably higher than the traditional subtractive method. When evaluating the overall environmental performance improvement through this transition, which principle of efficient resource use, as espoused by ISO 14018-2021, should be the primary consideration for ether dynamics to demonstrate a net positive environmental impact. Option A. Minimizing total life cycle resource inputs and outputs by considering the embodied energy of materials and the energy required for processing, alongside waste reduction. Option B. Maximizing the output of finished components per unit of raw material consumed, irrespective of the energy intensity of the production method. Option C. Prioritizing the reduction of direct operational energy consumption to meet immediate energy efficiency targets set by national energy policies. Option D. Focusing solely on the reduction of material waste, as this directly addresses the principle of waste minimization in production. The correct answer is A. Minimizing total life cycle resource inputs and outputs by considering the embodied energy of materials and the energy required for processing, alongside waste reduction. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021, specifically within its guidelines for assessing environmental performance, emphasizes the efficient use of resources. This involves not only reducing consumption, but also optimizing the entire life cycle of materials and energy. A key aspect of this is understanding the interconnectedness of resource inputs and waste outputs. When an organization aims to improve its resource efficiency, it must consider the broader implications of its material choices and consumption patterns. This includes evaluating the embodied energy and water within materials, the potential for reuse and recycling, and the design of products and processes to minimize waste generation. For instance, selecting materials with lower environmental footprints, implementing closed-loop systems, and adopting lean manufacturing principles all contribute to enhanced resource efficiency. Furthermore, the standard encourages organizations to set specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART, objectives for resource conservation, aligning with regulatory frameworks such as the EU's Circular Economy Action Plan, which promotes sustainable resource management. The focus is on a holistic approach that integrates resource efficiency into the core business strategy, moving beyond mere compliance to proactive environmental stewardship. Question 13. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14018-2021, which of the following best articulates the primary strategic purpose of an organization's environmental performance reporting, beyond simple regulatory disclosure? Option A. To fulfill the minimum legal requirements mandated by environmental protection agencies and to avoid penalties for non-compliance with emission standards. Option B. Generate marketing materials that highlight the organization's commitment to environmental sustainability and attract environmentally conscious consumers. Option C. To provide stakeholders with verifiable data that supports informed decision-making, enhances organizational credibility, and drives continuous improvement in environmental management practices. Option D. To benchmark the organization's environmental footprint against industry competitors, thereby identifying areas for cost reduction in waste management and energy consumption. The correct answer is C. To provide stakeholders with verifiable data that supports informed decision-making, enhances organizational credibility, and drives continuous improvement in environmental management practices. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021, Environmental Management Guidelines for the Assessment of Environmental Performance of Organizations, emphasizes the strategic value of environmental performance reporting. The core purpose of such reporting, as delineated in the standard, extends beyond mere compliance with regulations like the European Union's Emissions Trading System, EU ETS, or National Environmental Protection Acts. It serves as a critical tool for enhancing an organization's internal decision-making processes by providing verifiable data on environmental impacts. This data facilitates the identification of inefficiencies, opportunities for resource optimization, and the development of more effective environmental strategies. Furthermore, transparent and accurate reporting builds credibility with stakeholders, including investors, customers, and the public, fostering trust and potentially improving market position. The standard advocates for reporting that is consistent, comparable, and reliable, enabling stakeholders to make informed judgments about an organization's environmental stewardship and its commitment to sustainable development. Therefore, while regulatory adherence is a consequence, the primary driver for robust environmental performance reporting within the framework of ISO 14018 is to support strategic management and stakeholder engagement through enhanced transparency and data-driven insights. Question 14. A manufacturing plant is implementing a novel biofiltration system to reduce volatile organic compound (VOC) emissions from its production processes. To accurately assess the environmental performance of this new system in accordance with ISO 14018, 2021, which approach to data collection for VOC emissions would best satisfy the standard's emphasis on reliability, representativeness, and comparability, considering potential regulatory compliance under frameworks like the Clean Air Act. Option A. Relying solely on manual sampling of air at irregular intervals and conducting qualitative assessments of the biofilter's operational status. Option B. Using theoretical emission factor calculations based on general industry averages for similar processes without direct measurement. Option C. Conducting a single, one-time comprehensive laboratory analysis of the biofilter's output on a day with optimal operating conditions. Option D. Employing continuous emission monitoring systems, SEMS, at key exhaust points, supplemented by periodic laboratory analysis of collected samples to validate SEMS data and capture transient emission spikes. The correct answer is D. Employing continuous emission monitoring systems, SEMS, at key exhaust points, supplemented by periodic laboratory analysis of collected samples to validate SEMS data and capture transient emission spikes. Explanation. ISO 14018, 2021 emphasizes the importance of robust data collection for assessing environmental performance. When evaluating the effectiveness of a new wastewater treatment process, a manufacturing facility, the organization needs to select appropriate methods for data collection that align with the standard's guidance. The standard suggests considering the type of environmental aspect being measured, the required level of detail, the availability of resources, and the comparability of data over time and across different entities. For a complex process like wastewater treatment, which involves multiple parameters, e.g., pH, chemical oxygen demand, COD, suspended solids, specific pollutant concentrations, a combination of direct measurement and indirect monitoring is often most effective. Direct measurement involves taking samples and analyzing them in a laboratory using established analytical methods, e.g., EPA methods for water analysis. Indirect monitoring, on the other hand, uses sensors and continuous monitoring equipment installed in situ to capture real-time data. The choice between these, or a blend, depends on the specific parameter, regulatory requirements, such as those outlined in the Clean Water Act for industrial discharges, and the organization's capacity. For instance, continuous pH monitoring provides immediate feedback on process stability, while periodic laboratory analysis of COD might be necessary for a more comprehensive and accurate assessment of organic load reduction, ensuring compliance with discharge permits and providing data for performance trending, as per ISO 14018, 2021, focus on data quality and relevance. The key is to select methods that yield reliable, representative, and verifiable data to support the environmental performance assessment. Question 15. Consider a global logistics company, Trans Global Freight, which operates a vast fleet of ships, trucks, and aircraft. They are undergoing an environmental performance assessment according to ISO 14018, 2021 guidelines. The company has identified several potential environmental aspects related to its operations, including fuel combustion, waste generation from packaging and maintenance, and the potential for accidental spills of hazardous materials. When evaluating the significance of the environmental aspect, fuel combustion, across its diverse transportation modes, which of the following approaches most accurately aligns with the principles of ISO 14018, 2021, for determining the magnitude of the resulting environmental impact? Option A. Documenting the total volume of fuel consumed annually by the entire fleet and comparing it to national averages for similar companies. Option B. Focusing solely on the direct air pollution from exhaust stacks, without considering indirect effects like noise pollution or the life cycle impact of fuel production. Option C. quantifying greenhouse gas emissions per ton kilometer for each mode of transport, considering regional air quality regulations and the potential for acid rain formation in sensitive ecosystems. Option D, assigning a qualitative rating of high to all aspects related to fuel combustion due to its inherent association with climate change, regardless of specific operational data. The correct answer is C, quantifying greenhouse gas emissions per ton kilometer for each mode of transport, considering regional air quality regulations and the potential for acid rain formation in sensitive ecosystems. Explanation: the core principle of ISO 14018-2021 regarding the assessment of environmental performance hinges on identifying and evaluating environmental aspects and their resultant impacts. An environmental aspect is defined as an element of an organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. An environmental impact is any change to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial, wholly or partly resulting from an organization's environmental aspects. The standard emphasizes a systematic approach to this identification and evaluation process. This involves considering direct and indirect aspects, normal operating conditions, foreseeable abnormal conditions, and emergency situations. The significance of an aspect is determined by evaluating the magnitude of its potential or actual environmental impact, considering factors such as severity, extent, duration, and reversibility. For instance, a manufacturing plant's use of water is an environmental aspect. The discharge of treated wastewater into a local river, if it contains elevated levels of certain chemicals, constitutes an environmental impact. The significance of this impact would be assessed based on the concentration of chemicals, the volume of discharge, the sensitivity of the river ecosystem, and the potential for long-term damage. ISO 14018-2021 advocates for a holistic view, looking beyond immediate consequences to consider cumulative effects and the entire life cycle of products and services. The process is iterative, requiring regular review and updates as operations change or new information becomes available. This structured methodology ensures that an organization can prioritize its environmental efforts and resources effectively, focusing on the aspects that pose the greatest risk or offer the greatest opportunity for improvement. Question 16. A manufacturing firm, operating under a newly enacted national regulation that significantly lowers permissible effluent discharge limits for heavy metals, is conducting its annual environmental performance review as per ISO 14018-2021 guidelines. Beyond simply checking compliance with the new limits, what is the most critical aspect of this review process to ensure genuine improvement and long-term environmental stewardship? Option A, conducting a comparative analysis of the firm's environmental performance metrics against industry averages from the previous fiscal year, ignoring the immediate impact of the new regulation. Option B, proactively assessing the capacity of existing wastewater treatment technologies to meet the stricter limits and developing a phased upgrade plan if necessary, informed by a life cycle assessment of potential treatment solutions. Option C, documenting the specific instances of non-compliance with the new effluent limits to form the basis for future penalty negotiations with the regulatory body. Option D, focusing solely on reporting the current operational costs associated with meeting the new discharge regulations to external stakeholders without internal performance enhancement initiatives. The correct answer is B, proactively assessing the capacity of existing wastewater treatment technologies to meet the stricter limits and developing a phased upgrade plan if necessary, informed by a life cycle assessment of potential treatment solutions. Explanation: the core principle of reviewing and improving environmental performance, as guided by ISO 14018-2021, involves a systematic process of evaluating the effectiveness of an organization's environmental management system and its actual environmental outcomes. This review is not merely a static assessment, but an iterative cycle aimed at identifying opportunities for enhancement. When considering the integration of new legislative requirements, such as updated emission standards under a National Environmental Protection Act, the review process must proactively incorporate these changes. The organization needs to assess its current performance against these new benchmarks, identify any gaps, and then develop and implement corrective actions. These actions might involve technological upgrades, changes in operational procedures, or enhanced monitoring protocols. Furthermore, the review should consider the feedback from stakeholders, internal audits, and the results of previous improvement initiatives. The goal is to ensure that the environmental management system remains relevant, effective, and capable of driving continuous improvement in environmental performance, aligning with both regulatory obligations and the organization's own environmental policy and objectives. The emphasis is on a forward-looking approach that anticipates changes and fosters proactive adaptation rather than reactive compliance. Question 17. When an organization is evaluating its environmental aspects according to ISO 14018-2021, and it identifies the release of a specific volatile organic compound, VOC, from its manufacturing process, which of the following approaches most accurately reflects the standard's guidance on determining the significance of this aspect? Option A. Prioritize aspects based on their direct contribution to the company's overall energy consumption, as energy efficiency is the primary driver of environmental performance improvement. Option B. Focus solely on the total mass of VOC released annually, assuming larger quantities inherently indicate greater environmental significance regardless of the compound's specific properties or regulatory status. Option C. Evaluate the VOC's significance based on its potential to disrupt the company's supply chain, as operational continuity is paramount for business sustainability. Option D. Primarily assess the VOC's contribution to local air quality indices and compare it against established regulatory emission limits, considering any stakeholder feedback regarding its odor or perceived health effects. The correct answer is D. Primarily assess the VOC's contribution to local air quality indices and compare it against established regulatory emission limits, considering any stakeholder feedback regarding its odor or perceived health effects. Explanation: the prioritization of significant environmental aspects, as guided by ISO 14018-2021, involves a systematic approach to identify which aspects have or can have a significant impact on the environment. This process is crucial for focusing an organization's environmental management efforts effectively. The standard emphasizes that significance is determined by considering various criteria, which may include the magnitude of the impact, the severity of the impact, regulatory requirements, stakeholder concerns, and the potential for environmental improvement. For instance, a minor emission of a regulated pollutant, even if small in quantity, could be deemed significant due to its regulatory status. Conversely, a large volume of a non-hazardous, non-regulated substance might be less significant if it has minimal environmental consequence and no regulatory or stakeholder pressure. The selection of criteria and their weighting is an internal decision for the organization, but it must be transparent and justifiable. The goal is to allocate resources and attention to those aspects that warrant it most, ensuring that the environmental management system drives meaningful environmental performance improvements. This involves a qualitative and sometimes quantitative assessment, but the ultimate decision on significance is based on the established criteria and expert judgment within the organization. Question 18. Consider an industrial facility that has established environmental objectives for reducing its water discharge pollutant load, as outlined in its environmental management system, aligned with ISO 14018-2021. During the check phase of the PDCA cycle, monitoring reveals that the average concentration of a specific industrial effluent contaminant, previously targeted for a 15% reduction over the fiscal year, has only decreased by 8%. This data point is critical for informing subsequent actions. Which of the following represents the most appropriate approach for the ACT phase, focusing on the continuous improvement of the environmental management system and its performance in this scenario? Option A. Disregard the 8% reduction achievement and revert to the environmental performance metrics from the previous fiscal year, assuming the current target was unrealistic from the outset. Option B. Immediately cease operations of the specific process contributing to the discharge until a 15% reduction can be guaranteed, thereby fulfilling the objective through cessation rather than improvement. Option C. Focus solely on increasing the frequency of monitoring for the specific contaminant in the check phase of the next PDCA cycle, without altering the operational processes or revisiting the planning assumptions. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the plan phase's initial risk assessment for the discharge process. Reevaluate the feasibility of the 15% reduction target based on updated technological capabilities and regulatory benchmarks, and implement targeted process modifications or upgrade treatment technologies identified as suboptimal during the review. The correct answer is D. Initiate a comprehensive review of the plan phase's initial risk assessment for the discharge process. Reevaluate the feasibility of the 15% reduction target based on updated technological capabilities and regulatory benchmarks, and implement targeted process modifications or upgrade treatment technologies identified as suboptimal during the review. Explanation: the Plan-Do-Check Act (PDCA) cycle is a fundamental iterative management method used for the control and continuous improvement of processes and products. In the context of ISO 14018-2021, which provides guidelines for assessing environmental performance, the PDCA cycle is crucial for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and continually improving an environmental management system. EMS. The plan phase involves setting environmental objectives and processes necessary to deliver results in accordance with an organization's environmental policy. This includes identifying environmental aspects, impacts, legal requirements, and risks. The Do phase involves implementing the processes as planned, which includes training, operational control, and emergency preparedness. The Check phase is where performance is monitored and measured against objectives and legal requirements. This is where the assessment of environmental performance, as guided by ISO 14018, is critically evaluated. It involves verifying that the EMS is operating as intended and that environmental objectives are being met. Nonconformities are identified, and corrective actions are initiated. The Act phase involves taking actions to continually improve the EMS and its environmental performance. This includes reviewing the results of the Check phase, implementing changes, and updating objectives and processes. For an organization aiming to improve its energy efficiency, a typical Check phase activity might involve analyzing energy consumption data against targets set in the plan phase. If the data shows that consumption is higher than anticipated, the Act phase would then involve investigating the root causes, such as inefficient equipment or operational practices, and implementing corrective actions like upgrading machinery or revising operating procedures. This iterative process ensures that the EMS remains effective and drives ongoing environmental performance improvements. Question 19. Consider a large chemical manufacturing conglomerate operating in multiple countries, each with distinct environmental legislation, such as the EU's Industrial Emissions Directive and the US EPA's National Ambient Air Quality Standards. When conducting an environmental performance assessment, according to ISO 14018-2021, what foundational principle should guide the conglomerate's approach to collecting and analyzing data on air emissions from its various production sites to ensure the assessment is meaningful and actionable? Option A. Focus data collection and analysis exclusively on direct emissions from manufacturing processes, excluding indirect emissions from energy consumption or transportation, as these are considered secondary. Option B. Establish a systematic methodology that links data collection and analysis directly to the identified significant environmental aspects and the specific objectives of the assessment, ensuring data relevance and representativeness across all operational contexts. Option C. Prioritize data collection for air emissions that are regulated by the most stringent international standards, regardless of local applicability, to ensure a universally high baseline. Option D. Employ a qualitative data collection approach for all air emissions, relying on expert judgment and anecdotal evidence to identify trends, rather than quantitative measurements, to reduce the burden of data management. The correct answer is C. Prioritize data collection for air emissions that are regulated by the most stringent international standards, regardless of local applicability, to ensure a universally high baseline. Explanation: the core principle of ISO 14018-2021 regarding data collection and analysis for environmental performance assessment emphasizes the need for data to be relevant, reliable, and representative of the organization's actual environmental aspects and impacts. This involves establishing clear criteria for data selection, ensuring consistency in measurement methods, and validating the accuracy of the collected information. When assessing a complex organization with diverse operations, such as a multinational manufacturing firm with operations in regions subject to varying environmental regulations like the European Union's REACH, registration, evaluation, authorization and restriction of chemicals, and the United States Clean Air Act, the process requires a systematic approach. The organization must first identify which environmental aspects are most significant, considering both direct and indirect impacts across its value chain. For example, energy consumption in manufacturing facilities, water usage in processing, waste generation from product life cycle, and emissions from transportation are all critical areas. The standard guides organizations to prioritize data collection for these significant aspects. The analysis phase then involves comparing this data against established benchmarks, historical trends, or regulatory limits to identify areas of improvement or potential noncompliance. The selection of data points should be driven by the intended use of the assessment, whether for internal improvement, external reporting, or compliance verification. Therefore, the most effective approach involves a structured methodology that links data collection directly to the identified significant environmental aspects and the specific objectives of the assessment, ensuring the data is fit for purpose. Question 20. When an organization is undertaking an environmental performance assessment guided by ISO 14018-2021, and its primary environmental aspect under scrutiny is water consumption, which criterion should be paramount in selecting the most appropriate environmental performance indicator, EPI, to reflect operational efficiency and regulatory responsiveness, particularly in water-stressed regions with specific legislative frameworks like the EU's Water Framework Directive. Option A. The EPI's ability to relate water consumption to a relevant unit of production or service, ensuring comparability and highlighting efficiency gains or losses. Option B. The number of different water sources utilized by the organization, focusing on diversification rather than consumption efficiency. Option C. The ease of data collection, even if the resulting indicator does not directly correlate with operational efficiency or regulatory compliance needs. Option D. The historical trend of total water withdrawn from all sources, irrespective of usage intensity or regulatory context. The correct answer is A. The EPI's ability to relate water consumption to a relevant unit of production or service, ensuring comparability and highlighting efficiency gains or losses. Explanation. The selection of environmental performance indicators, EPI, for an organization's assessment under ISO 14018-2021 is a critical step that requires careful consideration of several factors to ensure relevance, measurability, and alignment with strategic objectives. The standard emphasizes that EPIs should be chosen based on the organization's significant environmental aspects, its environmental policy, and its objectives and targets. Furthermore, the chosen indicators must be capable of providing reliable and verifiable data, allowing for meaningful trend analysis and comparison. When considering a scenario where an organization is evaluating its water usage, a key factor in selecting an appropriate EPI involves understanding the context of its operations and the regulatory landscape. For instance, if the organization operates in a region with stringent water scarcity regulations, such as those enforced under the Water Framework Directive in the European Union or similar national legislation, the EPI should reflect this criticality. An EPI that simply measures total water consumed might be insufficient. Instead, an indicator that relates water consumption to production output or water consumption per unit of a specific product or service would provide a more nuanced understanding of efficiency and performance, especially when benchmarked against industry best practices or historical data. This approach allows for the identification of areas where water management can be improved, contributing to both environmental protection and operational cost savings. The selection process should also consider the availability of data and the resources required for its collection and analysis. Therefore, an EPI that is directly linked to operational processes and has readily available data sources, while also being responsive to changes in environmental management practices, is generally preferred. Question 21. When evaluating the integration of environmental performance data into an organization's strategic decision-making framework, as outlined by ISO 14018-2021, which approach best ensures that collected metrics translate into actionable improvements and demonstrate adherence to evolving regulatory landscapes, such as those governed by national environmental protection agencies. Option A, primarily focusing on the quantitative reporting of aggregated environmental data to external stakeholders without significant internal linkage to strategic adjustments. Option B, systematically embedding analyzed performance data into the organization's strategic planning, resource allocation, and operational management processes to directly influence objectives and initiatives. Option C, concentrating data analysis efforts solely on achieving compliance with the minimum requirements of environmental legislation, disregarding opportunities for performance enhancement. Option D, implementing a reactive data review process that only addresses anomalies or non-compliance issues when they are flagged by regulatory bodies or auditors. The correct answer is B, systematically embedding analyzed performance data into the organization's strategic planning, resource allocation, and operational management processes to directly influence objectives and initiatives. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 provides guidance on assessing an organization's environmental performance. Critical aspect of this assessment involves the effective utilization of data to inform strategic decisions. The standard emphasizes that data collection and analysis should not be an end in itself, but a means to drive improvement. When considering the application of collected environmental data for decision-making, particularly in the context of regulatory compliance and performance enhancement, an organization must ensure that the data is relevant, reliable, and actionable. For instance, data on energy consumption, waste generation, and emissions must be analyzed to identify trends, benchmark against industry standards or legal limits, such as those stipulated by national environmental protection agencies or international agreements like the Paris Agreement, and pinpoint areas for intervention. The process of transforming raw data into insights that guide decisions requires a systematic approach. This involves establishing clear objectives for data analysis, selecting appropriate analytical methods, and interpreting the results in light of the organization's environmental policy and objectives. The ultimate goal is to facilitate informed choices that lead to tangible environmental improvements and demonstrate accountability. Therefore, the most effective approach to using environmental data for decision-making involves integrating the analyzed information into the organization's strategic planning and operational management processes, ensuring that findings directly influence the setting of new targets, the allocation of resources, and the implementation of new environmental initiatives or the modification of existing ones. This integration ensures that data serves its purpose of driving performance and compliance. Question 22. When evaluating an organization's environmental performance related to stormwater management under ISO 14018-2021, which of the following actions most directly reflects a proactive approach to minimizing environmental impact and ensuring regulatory adherence? Option A, relying solely on the facility's existing drainage system to convey all precipitation runoff to the nearest municipal storm sewer. Option B, documenting the volume of stormwater runoff from the facility for historical record-keeping without implementing specific mitigation strategies. Option C, conducting an annual review of the facility's stormwater pollution prevention plan, SWPPP, without verifying the effectiveness of implemented control measures. Option D, implementing a comprehensive program of regular inspections and maintenance for all stormwater best management practices, BMP, and conducting source-specific pollutant monitoring in discharge. The correct answer is D, implementing a comprehensive program of regular inspections and maintenance for all stormwater best management practices, BMP, and conducting source-specific pollutant monitoring in discharge. Explanation: the assessment of an organization's environmental performance, as guided by ISO 14018-2021, necessitates a comprehensive understanding of how various operational aspects interact with the environment. When considering stormwater management, the focus is on minimizing the negative impacts of precipitation runoff from an organization's premises. This involves evaluating practices that reduce pollutant loads, control flow volumes, and prevent erosion. ISO 2021 emphasizes the need for organizations to establish and maintain processes for monitoring and measuring environmental performance indicators. In the context of stormwater, key indicators could include the concentration of specific pollutants, e.g., suspended solids, heavy metals, hydrocarbons in discharge, the volume of runoff, and the extent of impervious surfaces. The standard encourages a life cycle perspective, meaning that the assessment should consider the entire process from the source of potential pollutants to their eventual discharge or treatment. Regulatory compliance, such as adherence to local stormwater discharge permits, e.g., National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, permits in the United States or equivalent regulations elsewhere, is a fundamental baseline for performance. However, ISO 14018 2021 encourages going beyond mere compliance to achieve continual improvement. This involves identifying opportunities for pollution prevention, source reduction, and the implementation of best management practices, BMP, for stormwater. BMPs can range from structural controls like retention ponds and permeable pavements to non-structural measures such as good housekeeping practices, regular site inspections, and employee training. The effectiveness of these measures is then evaluated against defined environmental objectives and targets, contributing to the overall assessment of the organization's environmental performance. Therefore, the most encompassing aspect of assessing stormwater management performance, in line with ISO 14018 2021 principles, is the proactive identification and mitigation of potential pollutant sources and the implementation of effective control measures to minimize environmental harm. Question 23. Consider the fictional manufacturing company, Terraform Dynamics, which is preparing to communicate its environmental stewardship efforts to its shareholders, local community representatives, and potential investors. They have accumulated detailed internal data on energy consumption per unit of production, waste generation by type and disposal method, water usage in various processes, and the results of their internal environmental audits, including instances of minor noncompliance with internal procedures. Which type of report, as envisioned by the principles of environmental performance assessment and communication, would be most suitable for Terraform Dynamics to publicly disseminate this information, balancing transparency with the need to present a cohesive and forward-looking environmental narrative? Option A. A technical appendix containing raw, unanalyzed data from all environmental monitoring equipment used throughout the year, without any narrative or interpretation. Option B. A comprehensive sustainability report detailing key environmental performance indicators, progress towards targets, environmental initiatives, and future commitments, potentially including summarized audit findings and management responses. Option C. A detailed internal operational audit report that lists all identified nonconformities, raw consumption data for each department, and specific process-level improvement suggestions. Option D. A brief press release announcing a new waste reduction target without providing specific data or context on current performance levels. The correct answer is B. A comprehensive sustainability report detailing key environmental performance indicators, progress towards targets, environmental initiatives, and future commitments, potentially including summarized audit findings and management responses. Explanation. The assessment of an organization's environmental performance, as guided by ISO 14018 2021, involves various reporting mechanisms. These reports serve different purposes and audiences, necessitating distinct content and disclosure levels. An internal report, for instance, is primarily for management and operational staff to identify areas for improvement, track progress against environmental objectives, and inform decision-making within the organization. Its content is typically detailed, focusing on specific operational data, root cause analysis of deviations, and actionable recommendations for corrective and preventive measures. It may include sensitive information related to nonconformities, resource consumption at a granular level, and internal audits. Conversely, an external report, such as a sustainability report or a public statement on environmental performance, is intended for a broader audience including stakeholders, investors, customers, and regulatory bodies. The focus here is on transparency, overall performance trends, achievements, and commitments. While it draws from internal data, it is often aggregated, presented in a more accessible format, and may exclude highly sensitive operational details that are not relevant to external parties or could pose competitive disadvantages. The level of assurance or verification may also differ, with external reports often undergoing third-party review. Therefore, when considering the purpose of communicating performance data to a diverse external stakeholder group to demonstrate commitment and progress, a comprehensive and publicly accessible document that synthesizes key performance indicators and strategic initiatives is most appropriate. This aligns with the principles of transparency and accountability emphasized in environmental management frameworks. Question 24. A manufacturing firm seeking to align its operations with the principles of ISO 14018-2021 for assessing environmental performance is reviewing its supplier selection criteria for raw materials. The firm is particularly focused on enhancing its environmental footprint through sustainable procurement practices. Considering the standard's emphasis on life cycle thinking and influencing supply chain impacts, which of the following criteria would most effectively demonstrate a commitment to improving the organization's overall environmental performance in its procurement activities? Option A. Requiring suppliers to possess a general environmental certification, without specifying the scope or rigor of the certification's environmental management components. Option B. Selecting suppliers based primarily on the lowest unit cost for raw materials, assuming that cost efficiency often correlates with optimized production processes. Option C. Negotiating longer payment terms with suppliers to improve the organization's cash flow, indirectly allowing for future investment in greener technologies. Option D. Prioritizing suppliers who provide detailed life cycle assessment data for their raw materials, demonstrating reduced embodied energy and waste generation throughout the material's production and transport. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing suppliers who provide detailed life cycle assessment data for their raw materials, demonstrating reduced embodied energy and waste generation throughout the material's production and transport. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021, specifically in its guidance on assessing organizational environmental performance, emphasizes integrating environmental consideration throughout the entire life cycle of products and services, including procurement. Sustainable procurement involves making purchasing decisions that consider environmental, social, and economic impacts. This aligns with the standard's broader objective of enhancing environmental performance by influencing supply chains. When an organization aims to improve its environmental footprint through procurement, it must look beyond immediate cost savings and consider factors such as the embodied energy of materials, the manufacturing processes used by suppliers, the logistics involved in transportation, and the end-of-life management of acquired goods. For instance, choosing a supplier that utilizes renewable energy in its production, minimizes waste, and has robust recycling programs for its own products contributes significantly to the procuring organization's overall environmental performance assessment. This proactive approach to supplier selection and engagement, rooted in life cycle thinking, is a core tenet of effective environmental management systems aiming for continuous improvement. As outlined in ISO 14018, it moves beyond mere compliance with environmental regulations to a strategic integration of sustainability principles. Question 25. Consider a municipal waste management facility processing a significant volume of food waste and green waste. The facility is evaluating the environmental performance of two distinct biological treatment pathways: aerobic composting and anaerobic digestion. According to the principles outlined in ISO 14018-2021 for assessing environmental performance, which pathway would generally be considered to offer a more advantageous environmental performance profile, specifically concerning resource recovery and pollution prevention, assuming both processes are operated efficiently and in compliance with relevant environmental regulations like those pertaining to landfill diversion and air emissions? Option A. Anaerobic digestion, due to its potential for energy recovery through biogas production and subsequent utilization, thereby displacing fossil fuels and contributing to greenhouse gas emission reduction beyond that achievable by composting alone. Option B. Aerobic composting, primarily because it produces a stable soil amendment that directly enhances soil health and sequesters carbon, offering a more direct contribution to ecosystem restoration than the energy-focused output of anaerobic digestion. Option C. Both pathways offer equivalent environmental performance, as they both effectively divert organic waste from landfills and reduce the overall volume of waste requiring disposal, thus meeting the core objectives of sustainable waste management. Option D. Anaerobic digestion, but only if the digestate is further processed through incineration to capture any remaining volatile organic compounds, as this combined approach offers superior pollution control compared to the atmospheric emissions from composting. Correct answer is A. Anaerobic digestion, due to its potential for energy recovery through biogas production and subsequent utilization, thereby displacing fossil fuels and contributing to greenhouse gas emission reduction beyond that achievable by composting alone. Explanation: the assessment of environmental performance, as guided by ISO 14018-2021, requires a comprehensive understanding of various waste treatment technologies and their associated environmental impacts. Composting and anaerobic digestion are two prominent biological treatment methods for organic waste. Composting is an aerobic process that decomposes organic matter into a stable, humus-like material. Key to its environmental performance assessment are factors like the reduction in waste volume, the production of a beneficial soil amendment, and the management of emissions, particularly greenhouse gases like methane CH4 and nitrous oxide N2O as well as odor control. Anaerobic digestion, conversely, is a process that occurs in the absence of oxygen, breaking down organic matter to produce biogas, primarily methane and carbon dioxide, and digestate. When evaluating the environmental performance of anaerobic digestion, the energy recovery potential from biogas is a significant advantage. However, the process can also generate greenhouse gases if not properly managed, and the digestate requires appropriate handling and application to avoid nutrient runoff or other environmental issues. When comparing these two processes for a mixed organic waste stream that includes food scraps and yard waste, the primary distinction in terms of environmental performance metrics, as per ISO 14018-2021 guidelines for assessing resource efficiency and pollution prevention, lies in their outputs and energy potential. Composting yields a soil conditioner, directly contributing to circular economy principles by returning nutrients to the soil. Its primary greenhouse gas concerns are fugitive emissions during decomposition. Anaerobic digestion, however, offers the dual benefit of waste stabilization and energy generation, which can displace fossil fuels. The biogas produced can be used for heat and power, contributing to renewable energy targets. The digestate, while a nutrient-rich byproduct, requires careful management to prevent pollution, factor to be weighed against the beneficial soil amendment from composting. Considering the emphasis on resource recovery and pollution prevention, the potential for energy generation from biogas makes anaerobic digestion a more favorable option when energy recovery is a key performance indicator being evaluated, especially in contexts where local regulations incentivize renewable energy production or penalize landfilling of organic waste. Question 26. When developing an environmental performance report in accordance with ISO 14018-2021, which of the following elements is most crucial for ensuring the report's credibility and utility for informed decision-making by diverse stakeholders? Option A. A detailed description of the methodology used for identifying significant environmental aspects and the quantitative data supporting the assessment of their impacts, alongside clear explanations of any limitations in the assessment process. Option B. An extensive collection of photographs showcasing the organization's environmental initiatives and employee training programs, with minimal quantitative performance data. Option C. A comprehensive list of all environmental regulations to which the organization is subject, without specific commentary on compliance status or performance against these regulations. Option D. A forward-looking projection of future environmental targets, presented without an accompanying analysis of past performance or the current state of environmental impact. The correct answer is A. A detailed description of the methodology used for identifying significant environmental aspects and the quantitative data supporting the assessment of their impacts, alongside clear explanations of any limitations in the assessment process. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 provides guidelines for assessing an organization's environmental performance. Key aspect of this standard is the content of environmental performance reports. These reports are intended to communicate an organization's environmental progress and challenges to stakeholders. The standard emphasizes the importance of including information that is relevant, reliable, and comparable. Specifically, it suggests that reports should cover aspects such as environmental policy, objectives and targets, significant environmental aspects and impacts, legal and other requirements, operational controls, monitoring and measurement data, management review and progress towards objectives. Furthermore, the guidelines highlight the need for transparency regarding methodologies used for data collection and performance assessment, as well as any limitations or assumptions made. The aim is to provide a comprehensive and understandable overview of the organization's environmental stewardship. When considering the specific content, the standard advocates for a balanced presentation, addressing both positive achievements and areas needing improvement. This holistic approach ensures that stakeholders gain a realistic understanding of the organization's environmental performance and the context in which it operates. The inclusion of specific data, where appropriate, along with qualitative descriptions of initiatives, contributes to the credibility and utility of the report. The standard also acknowledges the dynamic nature of environmental performance, encouraging organizations to report on trends over time. Question 27. A chemical manufacturing company, Viridian Synthetics, is undergoing an environmental performance assessment as per ISO 14018-2021. A significant portion of their waste stream comprises specific solvent residues that are costly to treat and dispose of. The company is exploring strategies to improve its environmental performance concerning this waste. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14018-2021 for waste minimization and environmental performance assessment, which of the following strategic shifts would represent the most impactful and aligned approach for Viridian Synthetics? Option A. Establishing a dedicated internal facility to meticulously separate and purify the solvent residue for potential resale to other industries. Option B. Implementing a more advanced incineration system for the solvent residue that includes energy recovery capabilities. Option C. Negotiating a contract with a specialized waste management firm to ensure compliant and efficient disposal of the solvent residue through licensed hazardous waste landfills. Option D. Re-engineering the synthesis process to utilize alternative reactants that inherently produce less of the problematic solvent residue. Correct answer is D. Re-engineering the synthesis process to utilize alternative reactants that inherently produce less of the problematic solvent residue. Explanation: ISO 14018-2021 provides guidelines for assessing environmental performance, with a significant focus on waste management as a key indicator. Within this framework, the hierarchy of waste management is a fundamental principle. This hierarchy prioritizes prevention and reduction at the source, followed by reuse, recycling, recovery, including energy recovery, and finally, disposal as the least preferred option. Applying this to a scenario involving a manufacturing firm that produces significant byproducts, the most effective strategy aligned with ISO 14018 principles would involve redesigning processes to minimize the generation of these byproducts in the first place. This proactive approach, known as source reduction or waste prevention, directly addresses the root cause of waste generation. While recycling and recovery are important, they are secondary to preventing waste from being created. Similarly, finding alternative uses for byproducts reuse is beneficial but still involves a material that was initially produced. Disposal, such as landfilling or incineration without energy recovery, is the least environmentally sound option. Therefore, a strategy that fundamentally alters production to reduce the volume of byproducts aligns best with the core tenets of ISO 14018 for improving environmental performance through waste minimization. This proactive stance is crucial for achieving sustainable operational improvements and demonstrating a commitment to environmental stewardship beyond mere end-of-pipe solutions. Question 28. Consider an industrial facility that manufactures specialized ceramic components. The facility has identified several environmental aspects, including water consumption for cooling processes, solid waste generation from material offcuts, and atmospheric emissions from kiln firing. A recent review of local environmental regulations, specifically concerning particulate matter emissions, has indicated stricter limits than previously enforced. Furthermore, a life cycle assessment has highlighted that the energy consumed during the kiln firing process and the associated greenhouse gas emissions represent a substantial portion of the product's total environmental footprint. Which of the following approaches most accurately reflects the process for determining the significance of these environmental aspects, according to ISO 14018, 2021 Guidelines for Managing Significant Environmental Impacts? Option A, focusing solely on the water consumption aspect because it represents the highest volume of resource input, irrespective of regulatory drivers or life cycle implications. Option B, elevating the significance of solid waste generation to the highest level solely because it is the most visible environmental impact to local stakeholders, without a thorough evaluation of regulatory compliance or life cycle contributions. Option C, assigning significance based only on the immediate cost savings associated with reducing each aspect, disregarding regulatory compliance or long-term environmental performance. Option D, prioritizing the aspect of atmospheric emissions from kiln firing due to increased regulatory scrutiny and its significant contribution to the product's life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, while also considering the volume of solid waste generated from offcuts as a secondary significant impact. The correct answer is D, prioritizing the aspect of atmospheric emissions from kiln firing due to increased regulatory scrutiny and its significant contribution to the product's life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, while also considering the volume of solid waste generated from offcuts as a secondary significant impact. Explanation: the core principle of managing significant environmental impacts under ISO 14018, 2021 involves a systematic process of identification, evaluation, and control. The standard emphasizes that an organization must establish an environmental policy and objectives that take into account its significant environmental aspects. When identifying significant environmental aspects, the organization should consider criteria such as the magnitude of the impact, the severity of the impact, the likelihood of occurrence, and regulatory requirements. For instance, a chemical manufacturing plant might identify air emissions as a significant environmental aspect due to potential regulatory noncompliance under legislation like the Clean Air Act, the severity of respiratory health effects on the local community, and the large volume of emissions. The evaluation process aims to determine which aspects are significant enough to warrant specific management attention and control measures. This evaluation is not a one-time activity but an ongoing process, as operational changes, new legislation, or evolving scientific understanding can alter the significance of an aspect. The standard guides organizations to consider the life cycle perspective when evaluating impacts, meaning impacts arising from raw material extraction, production, use, and disposal of their products or services. The goal is to prioritize resources and efforts on those environmental aspects that have the greatest potential to cause harm or lead to environmental degradation, thereby contributing to the overall environmental performance improvement of the organization. The selection of criteria for determining significance should be documented and consistently applied. Question 29. When conducting an environmental performance assessment for a textile manufacturing firm aiming to reduce water pollution, as per the guidelines of ISO 14018, 2021, which strategic focus would most effectively address the overall impact across the product's life cycle? Option A, prioritizing source reduction of pollutants through material selection and process optimization, while also considering upstream and downstream water-related impacts. Option B, concentrating efforts on managing and treating wastewater generated solely from the direct manufacturing processes. Option C, implementing advanced end-of-pipe treatment technologies for all wastewater discharges to meet stringent regulatory limits. Option D, focusing on water conservation measures within the facility without explicitly addressing the chemical composition of discharged effluents. The correct answer is A, prioritizing source reduction of pollutants through material selection and process optimization, while also considering upstream and downstream water-related impacts. Explanation: the question probes the understanding of how an organization's environmental performance assessment, as guided by ISO 14018-2021, should integrate water pollution reduction strategies within a broader life cycle perspective. ISO 14018 emphasizes a holistic approach to environmental performance, considering inputs, processes, and outputs across an organization's activities and products. When addressing water pollution, this involves not just direct discharges, but also upstream and downstream impacts. The most comprehensive approach, aligning with the standard's principles, is to focus on minimizing the generation of pollutants at their source throughout the entire value chain. This includes optimizing material selection to avoid substances that are inherently polluting when released into water, improving process efficiencies to reduce waste and effluent volume, and considering the end-of-life impacts of products that might contribute to water contamination. For instance, selecting biodegradable materials or designing products for easier disassembly and recycling can significantly reduce the potential for water pollution during disposal or degradation. Conversely, focusing solely on end-of-pipe treatment, while necessary, is less proactive and may not address the root causes of pollution. Similarly, concentrating only on direct operational discharges neglects potential impacts from raw material extraction or product use phases. Therefore, a strategy that prioritizes source reduction and upstream/downstream considerations across the life cycle offers the most robust framework for assessing and improving environmental performance related to water pollution, as envisioned by ISO 14018. Question 30. When assessing an organization's environmental performance according to ISO 14018, 2021, which of the following best characterizes the fundamental role of environmental performance indicators, EPI, in the context of legal compliance and operational efficiency? Option A. EPIs are exclusively focused on reporting greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint, as mandated by global climate change regulations, and are not intended for broader environmental management. Option B. EPIs function as a reactive tool to document environmental incidents after they occur, primarily for regulatory reporting and avoiding fines, without a proactive role in performance enhancement. Option C. EPIs are primarily designed to demonstrate an organization's commitment to sustainability for marketing purposes, with minimal direct impact on day-to-day operational efficiency or legal adherence. Option D. EPIs serve as quantitative and qualitative measures to track an organization's progress in meeting environmental objectives and legal obligations, providing data for identifying areas of improvement in resource utilization and pollution control. The correct answer is D. EPIs serve as quantitative and qualitative measures to track an organization's progress in meeting environmental objectives and legal obligations, providing data for identifying areas of improvement in resource utilization and pollution control. Explanation: ISO 14018, 2021, concerning the assessment of environmental performance of organizations, defines environmental performance indicators, EPI, as specific measures used to evaluate the environmental aspects and impacts of an organization's activities, products, and services. These indicators are crucial for monitoring progress towards environmental objectives and targets, facilitating informed decision-making, and communicating environmental performance to stakeholders. The standard emphasizes that EPIs should be relevant, reliable, and comparable. They are not merely metrics but tools that provide insight into how effectively an organization is managing its environmental responsibilities. For instance, an organization might use EPIs related to energy consumption per unit of production, water withdrawal per employee, or waste generation per revenue stream. The selection and application of EPIs are guided by the organization's environmental policy, objectives, and the specific context of its operations, as well as relevant legal and other requirements, such as those stipulated in national environmental protection acts or international agreements. The primary purpose of establishing robust EPIs is to enable a systematic and objective assessment of an organization's environmental performance over time and in comparison to benchmarks, thereby supporting continuous improvement.